to talk about, as I was mentioning, the use of crypto and financial innovation to incentivize repurposing of generic drugs. So at the moment, there is a significant problem with the healthcare industry at the moment, particularly with pharma productivity. There's a concept called EARD's law. Essentially, it means that the price of new drugs is going up exponentially. It's over $1 billion at the moment, could be sort of $3 to $4 billion. Also, US GDP is around 20% of GDP. One of the issues is that essentially there are missing incentives under the current patent system for developing medicines where it's not possible to enforce a monopoly price. And as a result, there are safe, effective, and low-cost treatments being ignored, and this is including longevity treatments. So one of the reasons behind that is essentially there is something called a patent cliff. When a drug goes off patent, the price plummets to almost a very marginal cost, and for that reason, there's no more financial incentives to find uses for that drug because it becomes basically like a commodity, like industrial chemical or something like that. So in essence, what that means is that an off-patent drug is available to the public for very low cost. It is essentially like a public good because finding new uses then for those off-patent drugs, that's essentially information. So information about an off-patent drug that is safe and effective. For instance, an off-patent generic drug that could improve longevity. You can't use a patent to stop other people from taking that off-patent drug. So essentially it becomes a public goods problem, a little bit like open source software, and something that the crypto industry is particularly invested in trying to solve and generate business models essentially for public good medicines. So the problem is that the large clinical trials to show that an off-patent medicine or any kind of medicine works are extremely expensive. They're large randomized controlled trials called phase 3 clinical trials. They're required by the FDA in order to get FDA approval, but also to generate the evidence that this treatment is in fact safe and effective. There's like a minimum bar for this, but these trials are extremely expensive, sort of 10, 20, 50 million, 100 million sometimes. So the only way that these trials typically get funded is through private industry on the promise that they will be able to recoup their investment by charging monopoly profits. And unfortunately, that's not possible where there is an off-patent drug and it's available to be taken off label. So we've got the significant market failure as well. Like, as I was saying, new drugs can cost billions of dollars to produce. You've got to take them all through sort of the early stages, preclinical to phase 1, 2, and 3. However, a repurposed generic drug can cost up to 100th of the price because you can. There's usually a wealth of safety data around its appropriate use, and we know kind of what the safety and tolerance levels are. And you can start phase 3 trials almost straight away, which means it's a lot faster. So there's a real opportunity for longevity medicines if we could create a market model to incentivize repurposing of off-patent drugs to improve longevity. So as I was saying, there's a massive opportunity here. There's over 10,000 generic drugs, or rather about 7,500. It's difficult to say, but suffice to say, there's a massive amount of generic small molecule drugs available, over 50,000 nutraceuticals, and we might be reaching a sort of upper limit as to what drugs we can safely develop without having long-term harmful effects. And also, there's a lot of cost savings from use of generic drugs. So as I was saying, the cost savings are in the billions. Generic drugs are extremely cheap. Over 90% of the drugs that doctors prescribe are typically generic drugs. So over 10 years, that would sort of calculate to $2.2 trillion in cost savings. The problem is there's no financial incentive to kind of leverage those cost savings and capture those cost savings to make new therapies that could improve longevity. So there are just some repurposing opportunities. Like, we're not talking, this isn't sort of quack science or anything. There's actual real science behind repurposing. A lot of drugs are basically just tools that manipulate certain biochemical pathways, and you can combine those drugs in different ways, or those drugs that can be used in a new way to address different pathways. And we can talk about, but these are in other areas. There's naltrexone for treating chronic pain. BCG vaccine might be useful. Diabetes, also actually for respiratory illness. Tetrathiomolybdate could be used to prevent recurrence of breast cancer. Fluvoxamine has been shown to be effective treatment for COVID, on par with the very expensive patented drug called molnupiravir, which is governments have been paying billions of dollars for. But this is extremely low cost drug that has basically been shown and promoted as just as effective. Also, psychedelics, plant medicines, also are examples of drugs where it's very difficult to enforce a monopoly price if the natural version is available for very low cost. So why is this relevant to longevity? Also, most of the longevity drugs that we have the most evidence for are off patent. So things like rapamycin, NMN, resveratrol, metformin, vitamin D. There are plenty of drugs out there, and also with VitaDAO, it's possible they were funding Morton's lab, which is basically you can do retrospective studies on existing prescriptions, prescription databases, and find correlations between generic drugs and improved longevity and lower incidence of diseases. So there's plenty of potential hits, but unfortunately the commercial model doesn't work at the moment. So how do we fix this? We want to do something called a pay for success contract. This is seen as something quite financially innovative. We call it outcomes-based financing, advanced market commitments, subscription style payment models. But essentially it's a bit like a prize, sort of a prize incentive for doing some bit of useful research. So the way it works at the moment, you have doctors, they want to prescribe drugs off label, but they're taking on all the risk because they're off label. Often insurance will not recoup their pay for those drugs, and so they have extra liability as well if something goes wrong. Investors want to invest in repurposed generic drug repurposing, but they can't make any money back. And health insurers also want people to repurpose generic drugs because they can have a low cost treatment that saves them money because it keeps people out of hospital. So they all kind of thinking, hey, we've all got this problem. Why don't we come together with this pay for success contract? And shout out to Ariella, who's the comms person at VitaDAO for this cool cartoon. So to explain how it works, basically you have an insurer with a bag of money, say, $50 million or $100 million, and they want to say, we will pay for a repurposed generic drug on the basis that we will actually save much more than $100 million. So we're happy to do that. And an investor says, okay, well, we're fine to take on the risk of funding clinical trials because, repurposing clinical trials aren't necessarily guaranteed, although we have a lot of low-hanging fruit. And they invest that on the basis that they might get a return from that repurposed generic from the insurer under this pay for success contract. And then they tell an independent contract research organization to fund the clinical trials as per usual. And then the CRO comes back, and if the protocol is successful, they're happy, they get paid out. The investor gets paid out by from this retroactive fund. And the insurer then tells the doctors, you can prescribe, and we're willing to reimburse this soft patent drug, and this will reduce our healthcare costs, maybe through reduced hospitalization costs, hospice costs, so everybody's happy. So this is a bit more of a diagram to show how it works. You've got the payer, as I was saying. It doesn't necessarily have to be a health insurer. It could be a philanthropy. And we've got some very big funds now interested in longevity, but mostly doing basic research or looking at patented research, which again, basic research is still looking at sort of 10, 15 years away. And patented new drugs might not be available again for another 10, 15 years. We've got these drugs are really available now, and it could be we're just missing the data to prove that they work. So the payer needs to sort of put the money out first, and then on that basis, the impact investor will then fund as a retrospective fund. So they put the money up, but they don't necessarily pay it out. And then the impact investor will then look for generic drug repurposing opportunities and fund the researchers to do the research. So as I was saying, yeah, three main people involved. There's payer, that could be the health insurer, or government, people like VA or CMS. In the UK, the NHS. Single payers obviously have more to gain because they have more cost savings, whereas the US is more fragmented. But very large payers like a Kaiser might be incentivized to do this sort of research, and then impact investors will fund it, and researchers will do the research. The advantages versus sort of grant funding is that you're using the markets essentially. There's a risk transfer mechanism from the payer to the markets who are more willing to take on risk. Pharma, private industry is better equipped. They've got better technology, sort of higher paid people generally. Free market is also very good at allocating resources if there is a return on investment, and it's also relatively low cost. You've got a low hanging fruit. Repurposed generics would outcompete new patented drugs because they'll be a lot cheaper to make. So why DAOs? Why crypto? Basically, with open source, with IP NFTs, basically you can create a new kind of financial product that allows investment in something that wasn't necessarily something that could be invested in, and allows fractionalization and trading of that investment on the market. Essentially kind of gives you a cheap way to do an IPO, essentially, whereby and allow access to liquidity, and particularly for early stage biopharma. That's the main advantages of IP NFTs. And then with NFTs, you can basically, with crypto, you can crowdfund things. There are successful crowdfunding campaigns over kind of, hundreds of millions of dollars raised in like 30 seconds for the right project. There was $50 million raised to buy the US Constitution. Just if you can get a community involved with crypto, there's also a lot of crypto whales that want to, that are interested in longevity, particularly Vitalik, Balaji, those folks. So crypto makes a lot of sense, and also allows people to crowdfund in a safe, secure, global, centralized way. So we also partner with BetaDAO, who are looking at doing this and have an IP NFT platform. But at the moment, they're really only incentivized to fund patented medicines, because that's the only way they can get a return on investment. So we're hoping to be able to work with them to implement essentially an impact market, or like a flexible prize mechanism, or advanced market commitment, whatever you want to call it, but a retroactive fund to create an incentive then to repurpose off-patent drugs, improve longevity. And this sort of shows the model. On the one side, we have the payers, or the retroactive funders, who basically are the ones like the health insurers or the philanthropy, high net worth people who basically just want a treatment. They want to know, they don't care if a drug is patentable or off patent. They just want a treatment protocol that works and that will improve their healthy longevity. And then on the other side, you have investors doing the taking on the risk and of the clinical trials, and then basically happy to take on that risk. So at the moment, we're doing a pilot. It's for looking at essentially trying to build this thing. So an open source pharma longevity prize, working with BetaDAO, who have raised a longevity prize through the through Gitcoin round, very large Gitcoin round, but also looking to so 200K, but they're looking to secure additional funding. I think Methuselah Foundation recently came through for another 500K. But those prizes at the moment are looking at ideation. So ideation prize is looking basically at like essays, people to come up with new ideas for areas where people could fund do longevity. So it's very much focused on basic research rather than translational research. And we're more focused on the translational side. So, there are existing drugs, say rapamycin. We're working with Dr. Brad Stanfield, who's another speaker at EARD. And he's trying to basically crowdfund for a phase 2A RCT, a randomized controlled trial to look at rapamycin plus exercise to improve strength in the elderly. So, it's still a 2A trial. So basically looking at whether this particular intervention is safe, but they'll be looking at also at whether there is a trend towards improved longevity. It's only going to have 40 patients, so it's too small to show statistical significance for efficacy. However, we would use this as a pilot to prove the model, and if there is a trend towards improved, if there is safety demonstrated and a trend towards improved strength in the elderly, then that would trigger a payout under the smart contract according to the prize. So, if there's $1 million prize, then the investors in Brad's clinical trial would get a $1 million payout. And he's trying to raise, say, $400,000. So, they might not need $1 million payout. If we only raise sort of $600K, that might be enough. If we raise $200K, that would still incentivize an investor like a VitaDAO or an impact investor to privately fund Dr. Stanfield's RCT, which is a very novel and new thing. Like, you're creating a new market basically to essentially for data, for repurposing off-patent drugs and generating clinical trial data. So, and that's actually that's sort of what the patent system also tries to do, but instead the way to recover your costs under the patent system is by charging, so basically prescribing as many of your drugs as possible at a higher price as possible. So there's an indirect way, and it's very much linked to pharmaceutical sales. Whereas with a prize-like mechanism, basically the outcome is de-linked from the amount of pharmaceutical sales, and you can have a very effective therapy that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to take a lot of drugs or anything like that. And you're basically paying for the outcome. And for, say, a high net worth individual that is suffering from age-related illnesses and disease, they would be very much incentivized to know which off-patent drugs might result in improved healthy longevity for them. So, this is a very new model, and something hasn't been tried, and we've got a lot of low-hanging fruit. So this is a diagram also to show basically how the system works. You've got, say, a prospective funder, impact investor on the left, VitaDAO, and their role, basically, they don't want to fund off-patent repurposing research at the moment because there's no generic drugs. Rather, there's no incentives to do that sort of research. However, if there was a payer fund, an incentive, smart commitment that we can raise $1 million, then there would be a private incentive to do that research. So we could, through this pay for success contract, we could mint an IP NFT that represents the off-patent treatment protocol, say for Dr. Brad Stanfield for rapamycin plus exercise. VitaDAO could invest in that, and then if the RCT outcomes are met, they would get a payout. So that would create a scalable business model, and ideally the payers should benefit more than $1 million. So they would benefit, say, from that. They would be willing to pay for that data because they would benefit from the lower healthcare costs for their, or the government would be willing to pay that, or the high net worth individual would be willing to pay to know which off-patent drugs are safe and effective. So we think this is like the future of NFTs, basically. at the moment you've got billions of dollars being raised through the sale of NFTs as art. But imagine if you could purchase an NFT that represented a longevity drug, a safe and effective longevity drug that happened to be open source and off patent, so everybody in the world could benefit from it. And that should be worth, in my mind, a lot more than pictures, or you could also sell the art at the same time, so you could get the best of both worlds. But that's what we're trying to do, and I think crypto is a real opportunity to basically try these new funding mechanisms. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.